Are you good? Is that okay?
Chris, I can hear you over here.
Nearly done.
Yeah.
Thank you. Excellent. Well, I'm basically here to talk to you about what evidence really is. And Chris actually stole a lot of my talk just then by putting that slide up, because essentially that's where we're going to end up at the end. But we're going to get there in a slightly more roundabout way, because we talk about evidence all the time, we talk about research all the time, but we don't really know why. We don't really know why it's so important. And so essentially, most of my talk is going to be about the second half of that statement, which is why you should actually care. Not what it is, but why you should care about it. So, where I'm going to start is with a very simple example. And I've created this example in a series of very short stories around an imaginary person called Professor Plum. And that's largely because I spent most of my youth in caravan holidays in England where it was raining and we all played Cluedo. So, which is one of the reasons why I now live in Italy. So basically what I have here is a claim. And the claim is Professor Plum ate biscuits. Now it's a very simple claim, and you might make it any day when you're in the staff room and somebody else is eating biscuits. And somebody else was standing there with you, or with Professor Plum, and they go, well, how do you know that? How do you know that he ate those biscuits? And the evidence is that he's got crumbs all down his sweater. I think that's pretty fair. That's open and shut case as far as I'm concerned. And this tells us what we need to know. Evidence is providing an answer to the question, how do you know? So how do you know that Professor Plum ate your biscuits? Well, he's got crumbs on his sweater. Right, okay. So far, so good. This is where it gets a bit more involved. Professor Plum ate the biscuits. How do you know? He's got crumbs on his sweater. Well, how do you know those crumbs came from our biscuits? How do you know that he didn't just come from another meeting where we have biscuits? Professors go to a lot of meetings, and they generally get a couple of biscuits. So, we know that they're our biscuits that he ate, because we only get biscuits with green icing on the top. And those crumbs have green icing. So we know it's Professor Plum. He is clearly the culprit, and we can condemn him for illicit biscuit eating. And this is where we end up. How good an answer you need for the question, how do you know, depends on the situation. If somebody's eating biscuits that they shouldn't be eating, throw crumbs on them and say, stop eating those biscuits. If you've got bigger things at stake, you might need better evidence. So if we're talking about basically the biggest problems facing modern society, which is a lack of fitness and poor health, and personal trainers are probably positioned to deal with that problem better than anybody else. I think that slide that Chris showed us, with doctors being people that everybody goes to for advice about health, is awful. I think personal trainers are so much better positioned to do that. I think it's a horrendous state we're allowed ourselves to get into. So, what are better answers and what are worse answers? So, let's go on some more adventures with our fictitious character, Professor Plum. This is actually somewhere in Yorkshire. I think it's near the Three Peaks area. And Professor Plum likes going for walks, so this is a picture of somewhere nice that he might like to go for a walk. So, when Professor Plum goes for a walk, he takes a tennis ball with him. Don't worry, you'll get there in a minute. And he finds a fence post, and he finds the same fence post every day, and he throws the tennis ball towards the fence post. Okay? So far, so good. And when he's thrown the ball, he goes over to it, and he measures how far he got from the fence post. Okay? So he throws it, and it's 20 centimetres away. So he's like, okay, I can throw a ball, and it lands within 20 centimetres of that fence post. Day one. Second day, he goes back again, and this time he gets within 9 centimetres. Right? Okay. So he goes back, and he tells his staff in his laboratory, my throwing accuracy has improved since yesterday. How do you know? Yesterday I threw a ball 20 centimetres away from the post, and today it's only 9 centimetres. I've got better. Well, is that really the case? How do we know? If you were a clever lab assistant, you might say to the professor, maybe that ball that you threw on each of those days was a random effect. Maybe it wasn't what you would have thrown normally. Maybe you should throw more times. So that's what he does. The next day he goes out and he throws 10 balls and takes the average of all of those. And now he measures it's 13.4. Hang on a minute. We measured 20 centimetres one day, 9 centimetres, I got better. And now suddenly I'm measuring 13.4. And then the following day, he does it again. And now the average is 15.1. So suddenly now he's going back to his lab assistants and going, my throwing accuracy's got worse. How did that happen? Why have we suddenly got worse? Well, yesterday I threw 10 balls, caught 13.4 centimetres, and now it's 15.1. I've got worse. It's got further away. Why is this happening to us? His lab assistant again goes, you're not taking enough measurements, you're an idiot. So he goes, yeah, and now I've got a really big pile of balls there. Okay? So there's 100 balls there now, 14.31 centimetres. He got his ruler out and he measured it every single time. He was there all the time. And he does it again the following day. Now suddenly, we've got there. We've got the same number of measurements. We've got the same number, for a large number of measurements. So then, he's back again, and his lab assistant's getting really sick of him now. And he's like, where have you been in the lab all this time? We've been doing all this work. My throwing accuracy has not improved, it stayed the same. How do you know? I threw 100 balls, 14.31 centimetres, and the lab assistants get the stats packages out and go, yeah, that's significant. You're good. You're not really learned anything, but you're good. So, the question I have for you really is, why did Professor Plum provide such a bad answer to the question to start with? He wanted to know what his throwing accuracy was like. He threw a tennis ball. He thought his accuracy was getting better because it looked like it had improved. But what had actually happened was he was fooled by randomness. He thought that a random throw on one day or the next was representative of what he would throw all the time. And it's not, because random stuff happens. I say stuff happens because I'm on video. And basically what we have is a situation where we can fall into the trap of thinking that one throw represents every throw. And it doesn't. It's just one throw on a distribution. And what we say in scientific language is any event has a signal and some noise. We can represent this graphically. The signal is the bar down the middle and the noise is at the sides. Basically that's your big heap of tennis balls. That's what a big heap of tennis balls would look like if they all stuck when they landed. Because you'd have most of them in the middle of the measurement you were taking, and the rest of them would fall to the sides. And the problem is, until you measure, take all your measurements, noise is invisible. You don't know what you don't know. I think Donald Rumsfeld said that once. Let's go on some more adventures with Professor Plum, and this time in Italy, because Italy is by far the most enjoyable country to live in, as you can see. It's about the same temperature there at the moment. Here we are in Italy, and Professor Plum has gone on a conference because that's what professors do. And he's driving to his conference and he's got his postdoc assistant at his side. And he says, as he's driving on, all these cars are zipping past him, these beautiful Ferraris. They do actually drive Ferraris quite a lot. And everyone in Italy drives very quickly. And this postdoc, obviously, is very intelligent, says, how do you know that? And Professor Plum goes, well, since we left the airport, all these cars are passing me. So, I didn't have another slide there. The postdoc then turns around and says, well, hang on a minute. All you're seeing is the cars that are going past you. The cars that are going slower than you aren't passing you, are they? So all you've seen are the cars that are going past you. You've only seen half the question. If you're travelling at one speed and cars are passing you, and you think everyone else is going faster than you, that's rubbish, because there's a load of cars behind you that aren't going very fast at all. So, again, it's quite a bad answer to the question. Why was this? This is what we call survivor bias. We only see the things that survive. And this is very, very interesting for the fitness industry, because this happens all the time. I work with a few sports teams, and a lot of the coaches will tell me that their programs work really, really well. And I say, how do you know? I'm asking programs, how do you know? And they go, well, look, this is the team that we've got, and all of these guys improve their leg press strength or whatever by 30 kilos this year. Our program works. And I went, well, how many did you lose? And they're like, what do you mean? Look, how many players no longer in the programme. Because unless you measure them as well, then you're only measuring the ones that live. You're only measuring the survivors. If you actually measure all of them, you'll probably find that it hasn't improved that much at all. I get this all the time. Survivor bias, you only see the people that survive. You see this across many, many sports. It's called selection bias some places. And there's a very interesting observation that some people make. They go, cycling gives you big legs. Cycling makes your legs, your quadriceps, huge. Okay, why do you think that? What's the evidence? Well, I've seen a lot of professional cyclists that do the tour and they've all got huge legs. Okay? Okay. So maybe what you're saying is professional tour riders have big legs. You're not necessarily saying that the cyclists have. Cycling gives you big legs. Maybe having big legs is the only way you can become a really good cyclist. Survival bias. Exactly the same thing. So, what I'm really interested in talking to you about today is why we make these mistakes. Why do we do this? Because this is happening all the time, we all do it. Why are we doing this? Basically, what we are doing is drawing conclusions about what's normal from cases that do not represent the average. So, all the way back to the beginning with Professor Plum and his tennis ball, he drew a conclusion from a single tennis ball throw about what the average tennis ball throw would be like. Not valid. Can't do that. It's rubbish. Similarly, he's driving his car. He's seeing all these beautiful Ferraris zip past him in the outside lane. And he's like, they all drive faster than me. Well, no, just the ones you can see drive faster than you. And the reason you can see them driving faster is because they're passing you. The ones that are driving slower are all way back there. Again, he's seen a limited sample and he's assumed that it represents everything. It doesn't. Researchers back in the 1970s invented this long before somebody came up with WYSIWYG. They came up with WYSIARTY, which is what you see is all there is. And it basically is the psychological concept that's been researched by Daniel Kahneman, who's now Nobel Prize winner. And he found that we only see, or we assume that all that we see is all there is. Everything that we can see, we think that's the only thing that exists. Anything outside of that sphere doesn't exist. We're just going to make a decision based on what we can see. And that leads to both of the problems that we just talked about. It basically leads us to make conclusions about things based on the only thing that we can see. I was talking to Dan earlier. A lovely example is I was chatting to a physio friend of mine who I spend a lot of time with. He's a great guy. And he was telling me that he takes certain measurements every time clients come in. And every single client that comes in has this similar pattern. And I'm like, that's really interesting. Tell me more about this. He tells me more about it. And he says, I think this is the way people work. This is the way people move. And I'm like, how many healthy people have you tested? Silence. And I'm like, maybe you should do that before you go much further. Because he had fallen into the trap of assuming that what he saw was all there was. He thought that everything that he measured represented everybody, and it doesn't. It just represents the people he's measured. And I call this the confidence pitfall. I say confidence because I think it cons us more than it cons other people. That's what Chris was talking about, our favourite strength coach on the internet earlier. And it's actually a double con, because what happens when we first see something? So let's say we see something, and we think that, cycling is great for building big, strong quadriceps. Okay, fine. Let's take that as an idea. And we form that opinion based on some cyclists that we see who've got big quadriceps. Okay. Now, what happens after this is called confirmation bias. Every time now we see a cyclist who's got big legs, we go, yeah, that's it, I remember that, cycling gives you big legs. We see a cyclist with tiny little twigs, the legs, and we just filter them out. That happens all the time, we just filter them out. And that leads us to basically perpetuate whatever belief we had at the beginning, forever and ever and ever. And we very rarely change it. And this is perfectly normal. This is not something that people do because they're not very good at what they do. This is what we all do. And this is actually why we invented research, because we're so bad at this stuff. We invented research to basically help us figure out how to understand things, because just looking at stuff hadn't worked very well. And this is the simple version of what Chris showed you. I say simple version because this is the version that we use in strength and conditioning. Medical science uses a more complex version. It essentially basically just says that if you have a randomized trial, which means that you randomly allocate all of your subjects into 2 different groups or 3 different groups, then you can move up towards the top. And the reason for that is what you've done is remove the possibility of having selection bias. You've removed the possibility that you end up with all of the people that are going to do well in one group and all of the people that are going to do badly in the other group. You basically stopped yourself falling into that trap. And the research works in that we have enough people in both groups to create the effect that Professor Plunk saw when he threw 100 tennis balls. We have the effect where we have significance. So, why do you care about this? Well, this next slide that I'm about to show you, I think, demonstrates why you should actually care about what I'm saying. This is a chart taken from an incredibly famous study. It's actually so famous it's called the famous study. And basically it shows you the strength increases that a group of people had. I think it was 435 people took part in this study, and they all did resistance training for 12 weeks. And all they were looking for was how varied the responses were in this group of people. And on the left is the average for all of them, 14%. 12 weeks, 14% increase in strength. Okay? And this minus 32% represents the most unfortunate person in the entire group, because they lost strength. They got weaker. They did a resistance training program and they got weaker. It does happen. Very rarely. Okay? And this superhuman over here increased by 149%. That's just astronomical. That's incredible. I've never seen that in my life. Right? So, this is why you should care about this, because let me walk you through a scenario. Way back when you probably started, you might have had some clients who you took through a very simple resistance training program, and you had maybe a couple of them at a time. And maybe, with the program that you were using, some of them got enormous gains in strength. And you were like, I'm a genius. I'm the best. I've created the world's most effective strength training program. I am the next Charles Poliquin. You know? And then, right? And then, you tried it with some other people, and they got weaker, or they didn't increase at all, or there was some, and you were like, actually, maybe I'm not as good as I thought. Maybe I'm not very good. Maybe I should rethink this process. So you try something else, and you try something else, and maybe it's somewhere in between, or maybe they got weaker, or maybe they got stronger. And you are now bouncing between, I'll try this, does it work? Well, you're not testing whether the program works. You're testing who you've got in your study. You're testing who you've got in front of you. All you're testing is how well your client responds to resistance training. You're not finding anything out about what you're doing at all. It literally is that simple. The variability between human beings in terms of how quickly they gain strength is far, far bigger than the variability between any program you could cook up. And I spend a lot of time cooking up programs. It is by far the most interesting and exciting piece of information I ever came across in research. So, basically, to summarise what I've said to you is, evidence is providing a good answer to the question, how do you know? But ignoring that good answer, ignoring the ability to actually know something properly, will lead to you confidently going around believing stuff that is not true. Thank you very much.
Thank you to Chris.